Block Nation? Got my buddy Brent here. We're still back on that whole series thing where we talked about. And, we also had something new that our boss is doing. He's got a new toy.
Yes.
So I don't know if we need to put a movement warning on this thing for those of us who get motion sick, but just heads up, that thing's going to move back and forth on its own. But, and I say that because my brain goes 100 miles a minute and there's no telling what connections I'll make. But, back in the late 1900s, I was on a skateboard.
Yes.
And on a skateboard, I had a magazine that I like to peruse from time to time. It's called the Thrasher magazine.
While you're riding the skateboard?
That would probably be pretty stupid, but I was young and stupid back then. So there's no telling. I mean, there's no telling what I would have done. But, but the Thrasher magazine brought me to Lee Thrasher, which we both know and we love and, we respect a lot. And I want to get into something today, but I want to start out with a saying he liked to use.
Yes.
Trust but verify.
Oh, yes.
Which brings us to calibrations of scales and meters.
Absolutely.
Might as well start there.
Yeah. So a lot of times the temptation is there to do the bare minimum for calibrations for your concrete plant. In other words, if you are supposed to, your particular state DOT or state regulation of some kind requires once a year, then I'm going to check it once a year and I'll be done. And it's going to be okay, magically okay, the rest of the year, right?
Well, yeah, once it's calibrated, it doesn't get uncalibrated. We know this. It stays within calibration.
So, yeah, right. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong with scales, or sometimes out in the hills you'll hear folks call them weigh-batchers instead of a scale. Scale's just easier for me to say, but a weigh-batcher, I guess, is something that some people call them. The idea is you're weighing up a tremendous amount of weight, 40,000 pounds total in some cases. Aggregates, cement, other cementitious materials, your water sometimes is weighed, sometimes is metered. And if any one of those scales gets off by as little as 5%, you could be in trouble. And you could be in trouble and have a water to cement ratio that's too high. You could have an aggregate mix that's off. You could be putting in more sand or rock than you were supposed to. There's a lot of things that can go south in a hurry.
Well, it's not just calibrations, it's also make sure they work. And I mean, we had that, I'm sure we can get that story of way back when me and you found the air issue.
Absolutely.
But you talk about scales, and by no means did I have scales on the scale that you had scales, but in the lab that I worked in, we had scales and we had to get them calibrated, once a year. And we had a guy come in, he's like, "Hey Josh, your scale's calibrated, but on the front side and the middle." I'm like, "Wait, what?" He goes, "Yeah, when you get to the back side of the scale, it doesn't work." I'm like, that doesn't help, because as much as I would love to say, yes, I'll mark it, we'll weigh it here, we just didn't throw that scale away. But for whatever reason, this scale, if you weighed things on the front and center, it weighed right. You weighed it on the back, then it was out of calibration real quick. So there's a lot that can be done to it, which is why sometimes you need to check them more often. I mean, from an air pot that we had to check often, from my standpoint, there are every so many months we had to redo them, but it was nothing for us to quick check stuff just to make sure that we're in the realm where we're supposed to be. So,
and so sometimes things like admixtures, liquid admixtures, are sometimes overlooked as well by plant personnel, because most of the time that equipment's provided by the admixture company. That's and it's up to them to maintain it, etc. But it's always a good idea just to double check those admixture dosages as well. And the way to do that, a quick way to do that with meters, is super easy. You get a container of known volume and weigh up in your bottle or through the meter, weigh up an exact amount, 1 gallon, 2 gallons, whatever, and make sure that what's coming out of that plant is that actual amount. Those little things can make a huge difference with your quality. The first company that I worked for, we checked it once a year. We checked those things once a year. Went through a buyout. The second company was a larger company, and they required us to do once a month. Yes, once, because they realized the importance of calibrations, and that a single problem with the calibration, let's say a lightning strike happens when you don't know it, and you've got a load cell now on a hopper that's messed up, and you don't know it, and now you pour 400 yards of concrete in a slab somewhere. So it's a problem.
For my benefit, because I didn't work for your company, you said you had to do it once a month. Was that you physically doing it, or did you have to hire or bring somebody in from outside of your company to do them? What were you doing for that?
So one time a year, it was required for it to be a third party. And that, I believe, was a state DOT regulation. The monthly checks were our own people doing it. And so those were spot checks that we were doing. So calibration is super important. Don't overlook it. The quick story we wanted to tell, I have to share this story because it was the most amazing out there story. Josh is with a testing company working on a job site. I'm a concrete plant QC guy, and he calls me one day and tells me we got an air issue.
Yeah, because so from a testing company standpoint, foundations or even interior slabs, for the most part, do not have air. They have entrapped air, they don't have entrained air, and so a lot of companies will just not test that. Our company, we would push for testing it no matter what it is, just to make sure, because you never know what would go on. Yeah. And I was in a non-air mix and getting quite a bit of percent air. Yes. And that's why I called you. I'm like, hey man, and I don't remember if I was in a foundation or interior slab, but I was like, I'm seeing more than I should see. Yeah. Instead of seeing that normal 1 to 2% entrapped, I was getting 3, 4, and 5%.
Yes.
And I wanted you to know about it.
So I checked the batch weights, went back and looked at all the tickets and the batch weights, and I'm not seeing any air and training agent being dosed. But what I am seeing is I'm hearing back from Josh, we've got 5, 6, 7% air, whatever it was on the site. And this is 25 years ago, so I'm trying to remember.
I don't even try to remember. It was something more than it should have been. We'll just make it easy.
Yeah, exactly. So very first thing I did was I'm looking to try to figure out what's going on mechanically with the plant. And I asked just to describe this particular plant, you had a 4-inch water line that was metered going into the truck, okay? The admixture lines were all line full systems, and they were tied in a manifold to that 4-inch water line.
Okay. For someone like me who does not play in the batch plant, what is a line full system?
So a line full system, you have an admixture storage tank that's off to the side somewhere. It's got 1-inch line or sometimes 1.5 inches, depending on the volume of product you're carrying through it. And those lines go from the tanks to a pump. The pump then goes sometimes to a bottle, sometimes it's straight through, where it weighs it up and then discharges. Well, with a line full system, it stays, because of the distance between that pump and where it dumps is so far, that line would stay full of the admixture, so that when you pulsed it to pump, it wouldn't have to travel that whole distance.
Right, and slow down batching process.
Slow down batching process. We're trying to get 200 plus yards an hour out of that plant, right. So that's the idea behind it. So you got this manifold tied into the 4-inch water line. So I asked the batch operator to run some water through the system. I wanted to watch it. And he did, and I saw what I thought was a little bit of foam. He just hit it quickly, and I said, okay, now hold that button down. I want to watch this for a second. And he said, how about 30 seconds? I said, yeah, hold it for 30 seconds. And he held the water button down for 30 seconds, and the next thing I knew, it looked like someone had dumped a whole box of washing powders into a laundry machine. There was foam taller than me. Make a long story short, what was happening is there was a check valve in the top of that line full system. And as that water was moving past that the check valve had worn out. And as it was moving past that check valve, it was creating a vacuum and sucking that check valve open, which would then cause the air entrainment to go into the truck. Those are the kind of things that can happen if you're not checking your equipment as often as you should.
So you check your calibration, but you also check them. So going back into the maintenance, you're looking at how things are going. So we're looking at cement scales, your aggregate scales.
Yep.
Your bottles, your meters on the admixtures like we just talked about. What about the moisture of your rock? Saturated surface dry or it's really, really dry, but your sands.
Yes.
You're checking the moisture on it. And you know, you got the Neptune moisture meters. Yes. So you got the Trident probe going in. How often were you checking those?
So I found through experience that one of the worst things you can do is to trust a moisture probe day in and day out without checking it, because it will fool you and it will get out of calibration easily. So for me, it was a once a week, at least once a week, and on really busy weeks, we would be checking it every day, just to make sure that moisture probe is saying what the actual burn off is showing. And when I say burn off, I'm talking about taking aggregate, cooking it off, and getting, doing your math and getting a free moisture percentage.
I got one other question for you on the meters and things. And as a QC test guy, I hated these things when somebody called up and go, I've got this thing set, and I'm going to still slump you. I already know better. But slump meters on trucks.
Absolutely.
In the 90s, they were the bane of everybody's existence because they just didn't seem to ever work. But,
Yeah.
how often, when you get those dialed in, so to speak, how often were you calibrating those?
Yeah.
And describe what a slump meter is for those of us who are not
So back in the
savvy into concrete.
yeah, great point. So back in the 90s, they may be different now, but back then they were all driven off of hydraulic pressure. Okay. So you would read a dial gauge, and you would watch that needle bounce, and either at its peak or at its lowest point, I don't remember where you'd take the reading. But the idea was that the drier that concrete was, or the more that drum had to work, the more hydraulic pressure it had to have to turn.
Right.
So ideally, you're checking those. Each truck gets checked at least once a month, because those things would get out of whack. Now they have more truck telemetry and more advanced systems than what I was exposed to. But my suspicion is that you still need to do quite a bit of calibration and double checking, especially those that are measuring things like air content, et cetera. So refer to your manufacturer, whoever's doing your telemetry, to ask that question about whoever system it is you're using. Figure out how often you need to be calibrating those, et cetera, if you don't already. But calibration and checking is part of the concrete QC world that is not glamorous. I consider the field test on the job site, when you got the spotlight on you and you're out there with your puddling rod and you're making samples, that's the glamorous part. The not glamorous part is making sure all the stuff at the plant's working right. So you got to be the star of the show back in the day.
No. I was the most loved man on the job site, sarcastically speaking. But that's kind of what we want to just real quick through on the calibrations and on your scales and your meters. But next episode, just a sneak peek, we want to talk about the bane of most of my existence in the QC world testing concrete.
What's that?
The wash rack.
The wash rack, yes sir.
So like, subscribe. If you got any questions, again, please hit us up, let us know. Be more than happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you.